Have you ever tried to dissolve an entire era in plaster and straw? That is what we are asked to do every time we open the pages of the 19th century World's Fair. The official narrative claims that the White City of Chicago in 1893 was just a temporary set, built of cheap stuff to entertain the public for a few months. But ask yourself why these sets had foundations that went dozens of feet into the swampy ground and full-fledged electrification that was decades ahead of its time. The truth is right before your eyes, but you are trained to see in it only an artistic gesture. I argue that these cities were not built, they were cleared of dirt. This was a period of inheritance, when the new masters of the world found the abandoned hubs of the great Tartaria and tried to legalize their presence before the new humanity. Most modern historians are just highly paid guardians of the chronological void, whose job it is to make sure you never ask questions about the origins of your own city. Have you noticed any grand courthouses, libraries, or train stations in your area that look too monumental for those who supposedly built them in the 19th century? Write the name of your city in the comments and tell us about ancient structures with huge doorways and windows that have gone half underground. Your observations are fragments of the true map that they tried to burn. I am sure that the White City of Chicago, the exhibitions in Paris, Buffalo, Omaha, and Street, Louis were not a celebration of industrial progress, but a grand operation to dispose of the surviving centers of previous civilization. It was a sweep of the last evidence, an atmospheric signature of annihilation disguised as festive fireworks. Look at the construction photos of these exhibitions in 1893. You'll notice a strange, systematic pattern. The pictures almost never show actual construction work. There are no forests to enclose such gigantic domes, no thousands of workers, no mountains of garbage, and the logistical chaos that accompanies any large-scale construction. There are only empty, ready-made buildings among the excavated earth, which is more like an archaeological dig. They were simply digging up the palaces of Tartaria that had survived the global reset. But these cities were too obvious an indication of the technological regression of our civilization. Why do we need oil, coal, and wires if every building at the exhibition was designed to be a receiver of atmospheric electricity? The light tower in Buffalo in 1901 shone brighter without a visible power source than anything we can create today. That's why they decided to completely destroy them. Have you ever wondered why every major exhibition of that time ended in a catastrophic fire? Chicago, 1,894, burned to the ground. Omaha, 1,899, reduced to ashes, street. Louis, 1,904 palaces disappeared in flames. The official story says it was because of the fragility of materials, but marble doesn't burn like straw. It was a systematic annihilation of evidence. They declared stone to be plaster and granite to be pressed paper, so that no one would ask where the millions of tons of building materials had gone after the exhibitions closed. They blew up and burned the legacy of the past so that you and I would be born into a world of concrete boxes and believe that real history began only with the smokestacks of their factories and the first steam locomotive. It goes much deeper than you are used to thinking. We are now approaching the most important point of our investigation, the moment when the veil of illusion is finally torn under the weight of facts. You become part of a community of those who ask questions, while others continue to sleep in captivity to systemic myths. What I will reveal to you now explains why your entire life has been built on a foundation of total lies about progress. Subscribe to this channel right now to have access to the next files from my archive, before they are removed from the global network for spreading the truth that destroys their control over your imagination. Together we can stop this systematic erasure and reclaim the right to know who we really were before we were forced to forget our own names and our true greatness. But here is the strangest part of this great game. If you study the plans for the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, you will see that each building had a complete system of underground tunnels and railroad tracks that could not have been erected for a temporary decoration for half a year. How could 600 acres of infrastructure, including complex canals with running water and foundations capable of supporting the weight of iron bridges, be built in such a short time without the use of heavy machinery? The coordinates of deception indicate that these cities were nodes of a single planetary network of Tartaria. When you look at the ancient columns of Chicago in old photographs, you see not plaster, but a geopolymer concrete of a higher order, the recipe for which they declared lost in order to impose their fragile and expensive surrogates on us. The systematic erasure reached its peak in 1915 for San Francisco. Panama Pacific International Exposition. Officially a celebration of the opening of the canal, it was actually the final act of a drama of evidence destruction on the West Coast. They built another magical city, including the Palace of Fine Arts, which miraculously still stands today, reminding us of the true scale of the architecture of the past. But the rest, hundreds of buildings that looked like the grandeur of Rome or Babylon, were ruthlessly demolished or blown up. Why did they leave one object and wipe the rest off the face of the earth? Because one structure can be declared an architectural whim, but an entire city is already irrefutable evidence of the existence of a completely different civilization, one that did not need oil rigs and power lines. Ask yourself why the 19th century World's Fairs had so many sections with babies in incubators. The official narrative says that it was a demonstration of new medical methods. But if we compare this to the hundreds of thousands of children who were shipped on trains with orphans around the world during the period of the urban succession, the picture becomes frightening. It was a great reset of the population. They wiped out the original inhabitants of Tartaria through atmospheric annihilation and artificial starvation, and then brought in a new generation that had no memory of the past. The World's Fairs were a place where the new humanity, these orphan children, were shown the technologies of their predecessors as the latest achievements of modern science, so that we would never guess that we were just tenants in someone else's abandoned palaces. Stones cannot lie, even if you block up the entrances to the dungeons or burn all the paper archives. You can't hide the impossible precision of the granite and marble in buildings that were supposedly built by farmers of yesteryear with handsaws. When you look at the grand arches and spires in old panoramic photographs of Chicago, you see not architectural decoration, but sophisticated devices for collecting and transmitting etheric energy. Every molding, every gilded ornament on the roof is a wireless system that worked on the resonance of frequencies. They destroyed those cities precisely because they could not explain their work to new people without revealing the truth about the free energy that belonged to everyone by birthright. Technological regression was the price of our imprisonment in the modern economic model, and that's when the official explanations began to crumble completely. When independent researchers compared the plans for exhibitions in different corners of the planet. Why does the exhibition in Melbourne look exactly the same as in London, Philadelphia, or St. Louis? The same layout, the same giant domes, the identical speed of construction that defies the laws of physics of the time. It was the single world architectural language of Tartary, the single standard of construction from Siberia to Australia. They simply divided this huge legacy between themselves during a chronological void, assigning each part a new owner and a fictitious date of construction. It was a great handout of stolen property, which we now proudly study as the history of the formation of modern civilization. Ask yourself, where have all the detailed construction reports of those times disappeared? Where are the millions of drawings for each unique column or stained glass window? Where are the giant factories that were supposed to produce these thousands of tons of decorative metal, glass, and fired bricks? You will not find anything in the archives except a few general sketches of the facades. Because reports on real construction cannot be fabricated for objects that have already stood on this earth for centuries. They simply created a paper illusion to legalize their presence in these palaces of Tartary. And when the documents became too much, another accidental fire occurred, which wrote off all the inconsistencies. Systematic erasure works according to a simple scheme. Fire destroys matter, and lies destroy memory. But once seen, it is impossible to unsee, no matter how hard you try. Now that you know the scale of this floor, you will begin to notice signs of Tartaria all around you. In every old city administration building, in every train station that looks more like a temple than a transport hub. This is not the progress of the 19th century, it is just a pitiful remnants of grandeur, which today we are not even able to qualitatively repair using the same technologies. We live in a period of inheritance, using the fragments of a great planetary machine whose purpose we no longer understand. The global reset erased knowledge, but it could not erase the foundations on which your buildings stand. The truth is recorded in proportions that go beyond the logic of the time. Have you noticed how often in photographs from the middle of the 19th century, large cities look completely empty? Huge, clean avenues, monumental buildings, and only a few random people in top hats wandering around the city center like tourists in ruins. That's because they were tourists. This was the first wave of settlers to populate the newly excavated and mud-flooded city. They gave us these grandiose decorations, invented a false history for us, and made us work so hard that we never had time to raise our heads and ask about the true origin of these domes. The World's Fair was their last great show, the final chord of the annihilation of our collective memory before the curtain of illusion fell for good. Look at Chicago today. Where is that incredible white city that captivated the imagination of millions of visitors? It's gone. It's gone in less than a year. We're told it was simply demolished because it was unnecessary. But how can 600 acres of marble and granite structures be demolished in such a short time without any heavy machinery? It is a technically impossible process, and for some reason no one has captured it in a photograph. The buildings were not demolished, they were simply completely burned and blown up, so that no one could ever examine their real foundations and internal structure. It was an atmospheric signature of annihilation, disguised as an ordinary city fire. The coordinates of deception always lead us to fire, because fire best destroys the complex structure of energy stone, turning it into neutral powder. This goes much deeper than just a question of architecture or art history. It's a fight for your identity and your future. As long as you believe that your ancestors were primitive people who built masterpieces with ropes and sticks, you will feel insignificant and weak in the face of their modern system of control. But when you realize that you are the direct heirs of a great civilization that harnessed the energy of the ether and built cities of eternal stone, you will become deadly dangerous to their narrative. You will begin to question your share of this stolen heritage. That is why they are so terrified of every independent researcher, every blogger who finds buried floors and anomalies in official dates. They are afraid of your awakening. The next time you walk through the center of your city, stop, and stop reading the official plaques with the years of construction. Look at the masonry. Look at the thickness of the walls, designed for millennia. Ask yourself, could a man with a kerosene lamp and a wooden cart really have calculated and implemented such a project? You will see anomalies that are impossible to overlook, even if you really wanted to. You will see obvious technological regression in each subsequent layer of later renovation. You will understand that we are only inhabitants of a dying world that once shone with white marble and was filled with free light from the air itself. But memory returns to us. And with each new question you ask, their wall of lies becomes one brick thinner. We are only beginning to uncover the secret files of this global archive. Every burned exhibition, every palace erased from the map, is a clue that leads us to the truth about the Great Tartaria and who we were before the Great Reset. They thought that 600 acres of the white city of Chicago could simply be burned out of human memory in 100 years. But we remember. We see these discrepancies in the newspapers of the time. We see these grand structures in old lithographs that cannot be explained by official science. We know that the period of inheritance is coming to an end, and the time of the great revelation is approaching, when every buried building will speak out in its full voice. You are no longer the deceived commoners. You are witnesses to the collapse of the official myth of our origins. The next revelation is near, and it will be even bigger. Don't miss the opportunity to see the next piece of the puzzle that they have been so careful to hide from you. See you in the truth that has always been there, right now, in your city, in every stone that remembers the touch of giants. Thank you for your attention and courage to look into the darkness.